The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the usual hush of dawn before the savannah wakes, but something heavier, like sound itself had stopped breathing. Under the wide acacia tree, a shape lay half buried in dust. It was small, golden, and terribly still. Samuel, a field ranger with years carved into his face by sun and wind, slowed his steps. The air felt wrong. Even the wind seemed to bend around the moment. He crouched. The cub's flank rose once, faint, uncertain, then fell again. Flies buzzed lazily around its eyes, the faint shimmer of life dull beneath a coat matted with dirt. One paw twitched, weakly reaching for something that wasn't there. The ranger's breath caught. He had seen carcasses before, plenty of them, but this one still carried warmth. The faintest pulse beat beneath thin fur. He set his canteen down, twisted the cap, and let a few drops of water fall across the cub's cracked lips. The animal's tongue flickered, a reflex of survival too small to notice unless one was looking for it. And Samuel was looking. For a long moment, he simply waited. The horizon stretched endlessly around him, golden grass moving like waves beneath the wind. No sound of lions. No warning growl. No shadow in the tall grass. The cub's breathing was shallow but steady now. Its tiny ribs rose and fell like fragile wings. Samuel knew what this meant. Somewhere nearby, a mother was missing. Or worse. He turned slowly, eyes sweeping the vast emptiness. The savannah hid everything well, danger, beauty, and sometimes grief. Minutes passed. Only the chirr of cicadas answered him. The vultures had begun to circle higher now, sensing indecision. He reached into his canvas bag and pulled out an old jacket. Its seams were torn, its smell of oil and earth familiar. Carefully, he wrapped the cub inside it, leaving its head exposed to the faint breeze. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low, meant for himself as much as for the fragile creature in his arms. The cub stirred, a tiny whimper catching in its throat, the sound of something between pain and memory. As Samuel rose to his feet, the weight in his arms felt almost weightless. The animal couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. Too young to be alone. Too small to understand why the world had grown so quiet. He started toward his jeep, parked beyond a rise of dry grass. Every step he took felt louder than it should have, every crunch of the earth beneath his boots echoing through the silence. Halfway there, the wind shifted. A scent moved across it, musky, deep, unmistakable. Lion. Samuel froze. His eyes scanned the horizon again, heart tightening. Nothing. Only grass and heat haze. But he knew better than to trust what he saw. He turned slightly, placing the cub against his chest. "We're going," he whispered. His words disappeared into the wind. He reached the jeep without a sound of pursuit. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered like a shadow behind him. He placed the cub gently on the seat beside him, started the engine, and drove away, the rumble of the tires the only sound cutting through the heavy stillness. Behind him, the acacia stood alone against the pale sky. And somewhere in that tall, golden grass, unseen eyes followed the trail of dust fading into the horizon. The cub slept for nearly an entire day. In the corner of the small ranger outpost, a wooden crate lined with worn blankets became its refuge, and Samuel's silent worry. Outside, the plains stretched in muted colors beneath a soft drizzle. The air smelled of dust and wet grass, and every so often, thunder rumbled far off, too distant to frighten, close enough to remind him how small everything felt in the wild. The cub stirred at last when night fell. A faint cry, broken and dry, escaped its throat. Samuel crouched beside the crate, the dim lantern light painting soft shadows on the floor. He unscrewed the cap of a milk bottle, the kind used for rescued calves, and held it out slowly. The cub turned its head away at first, nostrils flaring, muscles trembling. It didn't trust the scent. It didn't trust the world. "Sure," Samuel whispered, his voice a thread of calm in the room. "It's all right." The cub blinked, eyes cloudy but alive. Then hunger, stronger than fear, won. Its small jaw latched weakly onto the bottle's rubber tip. The first sip was hesitant, the second deeper, then steady, a rhythm that sounded like survival. Samuel sat there in silence, letting it drink. The steady pull of the cub's mouth echoed faintly in the quiet hut, like a heartbeat returning. For the next few days, the world narrowed to simple tasks: warmth, food, rest. He warmed the milk on a small gas burner, cleaned its fur with soft cloth, and kept the nights free from sound. He never touched more than needed. Each morning, the cub grew stronger, paws pushing against the blanket, eyes following movement, tail flicking in uncertainty. When it tried to stand, it wobbled, then collapsed in a small heap of determination. By the third day, it could take a few careful steps. Its claws clicked softly on the wood, its movements unsure but eager. It began to explore, sniffing Samuel's boots, pawing at the empty corner of the crate, testing the edges of its new world. Samuel watched quietly. He had rescued animals before, antelope, jackals, even an injured eagle once, but this was different. The cub's presence filled the air with something ancient. The room felt smaller, but somehow more alive. Outside, the rain eased into light drizzle. The scent of acacia drifted through the open window, carried by a cool wind. The cub looked toward the sound, ears twitching. There was something in its gaze, longing, perhaps, or instinct remembering what it had lost. At dusk, Samuel took it out for the first time. He set it down just outside the hut, on the edge of the clearing. The earth was soft beneath its paws. The cub hesitated, then pressed its nose to the ground and sniffed the wind. The smell of wet soil, wild grass, and distant life filled its lungs. For a moment, it looked back at him. No fear, only curiosity. Then it took 2 uncertain steps into the open. Samuel crouched nearby, hands resting on his knees. "You'll find your strength," he murmured. "And when you do, you'll go home." The cub tilted its head, tail twitching once. It didn't understand, but it didn't need to. As the light faded, the horizon turned violet and gold. Crickets began to sing. The cub curled up beside Samuel's boot, eyes closing, breath slow and steady. He didn't move for a long time. Somewhere out there, beyond the curtain of grass and rain, a mother's roar might still echo, or it might not. Either way, the cub would soon belong to the wild again. That night, as the generator hummed softly and the lantern dimmed, Samuel sat beside the crate once more. The cub's paw rested lightly against his sleeve, small and warm. He smiled faintly in the dark. It was not trust yet. But it was something close, a beginning built on silence, and the fragile courage to live again. The 3rd week came quietly, carried by warm winds and long golden mornings. The cub was no longer fragile. Its fur had thickened, its eyes sharp and alert. When it moved, there was a quiet confidence in each step, a rhythm that belonged to the wild and not to walls. Samuel had known from the beginning that this day would come. The outpost was not a home, only a shelter between storms. Still, when he watched the cub tumble and chase moths across the dirt floor, something inside him hesitated. That morning, he filled his canteen, checked the jeep, and loaded a small cooler with water and milk. The cub followed him to the door, tail high, head tilted, as if it understood that something was ending. The sun had just risen when they drove out. The plains shimmered in soft gold, and the air carried the low hum of distant life, zebra herds, antelope calls, the murmur of unseen predators. The cub sat on the passenger seat, peering out the open window, nose twitching at every scent the wind offered. Samuel smiled. "Smells like home, doesn't it?" he said softly. The cub blinked, then pressed its paw against the window frame, watching the endless sea of grass rush past. After an hour's drive, Samuel stopped near the same acacia where he had first found it, the place where silence had once felt like grief. Now, the silence was different. It carried hope, a sense of something waiting to be mended. He opened the jeep door and stepped out. The cub hesitated, crouched for a moment, then jumped down. Its paws touched the earth, and for the first time, it didn't look back immediately. It sniffed the ground, ears twitching, muscles tense but alive with instinct. Samuel crouched a few meters away, watching. His hands rested loosely on his knees, his face calm but heavy with thought. "Go on," he said quietly. "The land remembers you." The cub's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met, man and creature, separated by everything, yet joined by this one brief understanding. Then, with a small bound, the cub began to move through the tall grass. It stopped, turned once, then continued, vanishing halfway into the golden waves of vegetation. Samuel stood there, tracing its faint movement, a ripple of fur and sunlight. Then the sound came. Low at first, carried by distance, a deep, rolling note that vibrated through the ground. A lion's call. Samuel froze. He knew the tone. It wasn't aggression. It was communication. A gathering. He scanned the plains, heart steady but alert. The cub lifted its head, ears perked, eyes wide with recognition. It made a tiny answering sound, thin and high, but full of life. Somewhere beyond the ridge, another call responded. Then another. The cub began to move faster now, following the invisible trail of voices woven through the wind. It disappeared completely into the tall grass. Samuel took one step forward, then stopped himself. This was not his moment anymore. He waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. The air was still again, except for the faint rustle of leaves and the whisper of insects. And then, from far off, a sound broke the stillness, a chorus of low growls, followed by soft, rhythmic chuffs. Not a fight. Not a warning. It was the sound lions made when they greeted their own. Samuel exhaled slowly, shoulders easing. The cub had found them. He looked to the horizon where the sun burned low, turning the plains into rivers of amber and shadow. A gust of wind moved past him, carrying the faint scent of lions, strong, wild, alive. He smiled, quiet and proud. "You're home now." The words vanished into the open air, but somehow he felt they reached their mark. Samuel turned back to the jeep, leaving the acacia swaying behind him. For the first time in many days, the plains didn't feel empty. The air was still when Samuel felt it, that quiet shift before something appears. He stood beside his jeep beneath the same acacia tree, the one that had once sheltered a dying cub. Now, the silence felt heavier, more alert. The tall grass trembled. A shape moved within it, low, smooth, deliberate. Then, from the golden sea of stems, a lioness emerged. Her body was strong and lean, her gaze fixed on him with unreadable calm. Samuel didn't move. His breath was slow, steady. He had wandered close to danger before, but this was different. This was a meeting, not a hunt. Behind her came two more lionesses, silent and purposeful. Then the grass parted again, and a massive figure stepped into the light, the pride male. His manner rippled dark against the sun, his eyes heavy with that ancient authority only lions possess. Between them trotted the cub. It was taller now, surer on its feet, moving easily among the pride. Samuel felt a strange ache, pride, relief, something nameless all at once. The lionesses formed a semicircle, their bodies tense but not hostile. The male stayed behind them, his presence enough to claim the space. Dust drifted lazily in the sunlight between them, like the world holding its breath. The cub was the first to move closer. It stopped a few meters away, head tilted, tail swishing uncertainly. The lioness nearest to it gave a soft rumble, a mother's warning, protective yet calm. Samuel lowered his gaze slightly, careful not to challenge. He had no weapon drawn, no movement sharp enough to startle. He understood this language: stillness, patience, respect. "It's all right," he murmured under his breath, not sure who the words were for. The cub took another step, slow and deliberate. Then another. The distance between them closed until Samuel could see the faint mark of dust across its nose, the same faint smudge that had been there weeks ago when he'd lifted it from the dirt. It stopped just before him. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the cub brushed gently against his boot, a fleeting touch, soft as breath, brief as memory. Samuel's throat tightened. He didn't reach out, didn't dare. The moment wasn't his to claim, only to witness. From behind, the lioness watched in silence. Her eyes flicked between the man and her cub, not in anger, but recognition. She stepped forward, nose lifted, the wind carrying Samuel's scent toward her. For a tense second, the distance felt impossibly thin. Then she exhaled, a low, rumbling huff. The kind lions make when danger passes. The cub turned, nuzzled her leg, and together they stepped back toward the others. The pride remained a moment longer, studying the quiet figure by the jeep. The male lion's gaze met Samuel's once, golden, solemn, timeless. And then, without a sound, the pride turned. One by one, they disappeared into the tall grass, bodies fading into gold and shadow until nothing remained but the rustle of leaves. Samuel stood alone again. His pulse still beat hard, but his fear had vanished. What lingered instead was something older, reverence. At his feet, a single paw print pressed into the dust beside his boot. He looked at it for a long time before the wind began to blur its edges. The plain sighed. Birds called again. The world, as if satisfied, continued breathing. For Samuel, it felt as though something had been returned, not the cub, not the moment, but balance. The wild had seen him. And, just for an instant, it had accepted him. Evening came slowly, as though the sky itself didn't want to let go of the light. The horizon burned gold, then softened into rose and amber. The air carried a new kind of quiet, not the stillness of danger, but of peace finding its way home. Samuel stood beside his jeep, the engine long cooled. The acacia tree cast its thin shadow across the ground where, earlier, the pride had stood. The cub's paw print was still faintly visible, half filled with dust, half untouched, a small reminder that what he'd witnessed had truly happened. He watched the grass sway, endless and unbroken, and somewhere beyond that vastness, he could hear them, low, distant roars echoing like thunder pressed deep into the land. The pride had moved on, but their presence lingered in every vibration beneath his boots. The cub's cry rose once among the sounds, faint, playful, familiar. Samuel smiled, the kind of smile that carries both joy and ache. He opened the Jeep door, reached for his old jacket, and shook the dust from it. The fabric still carried a trace of the cub's scent, wild musk mixed with earth and milk. He folded it neatly and placed it on the seat beside him. "Goodbye, little one," he said softly. "The wild's yours again." He didn't start the engine immediately. He simply stood there, breathing in the dusk, the scent of rain far off, the hum of insects, the slow turning of the earth beneath the cooling air. The savannah was vast, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Complete. A flock of egrets crossed the sky, white wings glowing in the fading sun. The wind brushed past, carrying the faint rustle of grass and the promise of nightfall. Samuel listened. Each sound, each breath, felt heavier with meaning. He thought of the cub's first weak cries, its trembling steps toward freedom, and the moment it had brushed against his boot, the briefest thread of trust between two worlds that were never meant to meet. In his years on these plains, Samuel had seen many rescues, lives saved, lives lost, the endless rhythm of nature continuing as if untouched. But this one felt different. It wasn't about saving. It was about understanding. He finally climbed into the Jeep, started the engine, and let the hum roll softly through the open air. The sound didn't disturb the land. It joined it, blending with the wind and the distant roars. As he began to drive away, he glanced once more in the mirror. The acacia tree stood alone against the crimson sky, its branches curved like open arms. Beneath it, the grass swayed gently, the same place where a small, still body had once lain, and where life had quietly begun again. The light deepened into violet. The day folded itself into night. Somewhere far beyond the reach of headlights, the pride moved as one, the cub safe among them, its tiny paw steps lost in the rhythm of its family's stride. Samuel drove without hurry. The headlights cut a soft path through the gathering dark, dust rising behind him like mist. He felt the weight of the day in his chest, not heavy, but full. When he reached the ridge, he stopped for one last look. The plains stretched endlessly beneath the deepening stars. For a moment, a single roar echoed across the distance, strong, confident, alive. Samuel smiled again, faintly this time. It wasn't farewell. It was gratitude, quiet, wordless, eternal. He shifted the Jeep into gear, and as he drove down into the night, the sound of the wild followed him, not behind, not ahead, but all around. The cub was gone, but the silence it left behind was beautiful.